always believed in trust. Without it, relationships crumble into dust, or so I thought. For years, I had built my life with Julian around that simple truth. He was my husband, my partner, and my everything, or at least that was the illusion I clung to. That night, the air in our small London flat felt unusually still, heavy almost as if it knew something I didn't. Julian was in the kitchen, humming softly to himself as he chopped vegetables for dinner. His dark curls were damp from his post-work shower, and he looked like the same man I had fallen in love with 5 years ago. He smiled at me over his shoulder, the knife rhythmically hitting the cutting board. "You're quiet tonight," he said, glancing at me briefly. "Just tired," I replied, forcing a smile. I tried to focus on the book in my hands, but the words blurred together. My eyes kept drifting to his phone, lying there on the sofa cushion, almost daring me to pick it up. I had never been the sort of person to invade someone's privacy. Julian and I had always shared everything: passwords, schedules, even the occasional silly secret. But lately something had changed. In the past few weeks, he had been different. Subtle things. He started tilting his phone screen away from me when he texted. He would excuse himself to take calls in another room, saying it was work-related but speaking in hushed tones. He had always been affectionate, but now his touches felt rehearsed, as though he were compensating for something. "Eve," he said, snapping me out of my thoughts, "can you grab the olive oil from the shelf?" "Sure," I murmured, setting my book down. But as I stood, my gaze lingered on the phone again. He wasn't looking. His back was turned, and the sound of the knife against the cutting board masked my quiet movements. I reached for it, telling myself it was nothing, that I was just being paranoid. The screen lit up in my hand, and my heart stopped when I saw the preview of a message. "Miss you already. Last night was perfect. When can we meet again?" The sender's name wasn't listed, just a generic J initial. A wave of cold dread washed over me. I shouldn't look. I should put the phone back and walk away. But the pit forming in my stomach told me otherwise. I swiped the screen, and to my dismay it was unlocked. The thread of messages was there, plain as day. The texts were flirtatious, intimate. "I wish we didn't have to hide. It's exhausting, but you're worth it. I can't stop thinking about last weekend. You looked so beautiful." My breath hitched. My fingers scrolled down involuntarily, unable to stop myself. There were photos too, nothing explicit, just casual selfies and shots of wine glasses at a restaurant table. But the familiarity of it all cut deeper. He had shared these moments with someone else, moments that were meant to be ours. "Eve." Julian's voice broke through the fog of my thoughts. I scrambled to lock the phone, and placed it back on the cushion, just as he appeared in the doorway, holding a tomato in one hand, and a knife in the other. His brow furrowed slightly. "Everything okay?" "Yeah," I said quickly, my voice tight. "I'll get the oil." I turned to the cupboard, trying to steady my breathing. My hands trembled as I handed him the bottle. "Thanks," he said, his eyes searching mine for a moment before he returned to his task. The rest of the evening passed in a haze. Julian acted as though everything was normal, laughing softly at a TV show we watched together, telling me about his plans for the weekend. But I couldn't focus. My thoughts were consumed by the messages, the betrayal. My Julian, the man who had once promised me forever, was hiding something, and I had no idea who he truly was anymore. That night, as he lay sleeping beside me, I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing. I replayed the messages over and over in my head. Who was this person? My imagination conjured faces, coworkers, gym-goers, maybe an ex. But none of it made sense. Julian had always been attentive and loyal. How had I missed this? The next day I decided to act. Julian left for work as usual, kissing me on the forehead before grabbing his bag and heading out the door. Once I was alone, I sat at the dining table with my laptop, determined to find answers. The name in the messages wasn't enough of a clue, so I started searching for patterns. My first stop was Julian's social media. His posts were painfully ordinary: pictures of us on holiday, random shots of the city, and vague captions about work. Nothing pointed to infidelity. But then I remembered the photos from the messages, the wine glasses, the restaurant table. I opened Google and typed in the name of the restaurant, I had recognized in one of the pictures. It wasn't far from here. My stomach churned as I imagined him sitting there, smiling at someone else the way he used to smile at me. I couldn't stop there. I searched through mutual friends, looked for anything unusual, anything that might explain the texts. Hours passed, and I was no closer to an answer. Frustrated, I leaned back in my chair, ready to give up. And then I remembered something. The account name listed in one of the messages had an unusual phrase attached to it. I typed it into Instagram, and to my surprise, a profile appeared. It wasn't public, but the bio read, "Living unapologetically." There were only a handful of posts, pictures of sunsets, cryptic quotes, and the occasional selfie. My heart stopped when I recognized the face in the photos. It was Liam, my older brother. The shock of seeing Liam's face on that account hit me like a punch to the chest. My heart pounded as I stared at his profile picture, my mind refusing to connect the dots. It couldn't be. There had to be a mistake. I clicked on the account again, scrutinizing every detail. The cryptic quotes, the carefully framed photos, it all felt so unlike him. Liam wasn't the type to be secretive, or at least I had thought so. He was my brother, my protector growing up, the one person I could always count on. But as I scrolled through his posts, the doubt grew heavier. One photo stood out, a picture of a familiar corner table at a wine bar Julian had mentioned once or twice. My stomach churned. I sat back in my chair, gripping the edge of the table, as if the room might tilt. The texts, the photos, the secrecy, it all pointed to him. But why? How? Liam and Julian had always gotten along well enough. But they weren't particularly close. I thought back to family gatherings, holidays, birthdays. Their interactions had always been polite, even friendly, but nothing that would suggest this. I shook my head, trying to push the thought away. Maybe I was jumping to conclusions. Maybe the account wasn't even his. But deep down I knew it was. I knew my brother's face. And there was no mistaking the moments in those photos. I had to talk to him. The next day, I drove out to Liam's flat on the other side of the city. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. My mind raced with questions, accusations, and fears, but I had no plan for what I would say. When I arrived, I sat in the car for a long moment staring up at his building. The thought of confronting him terrified me, but I couldn't let this fester. If he was involved with Julian, I needed to hear it from him. I climbed the stairs to his door and knocked, my pulse hammering in my ears. "Coming." Liam's voice called from inside. A moment later, the door opened, and there he was, standing in a loose t-shirt and jeans, a warm smile on his face. "Eve, this is a surprise. Everything okay?" The sight of him, so casual and unbothered, made my stomach twist. How could he act like everything was normal? "Can I come in?" I asked, my voice tight. "Of course." He stepped aside, closing the door behind me. "What's up? You look like you've seen a ghost." I didn't sit down. Instead, I turned to face him, crossing my arms over my chest. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." His smile faltered. "Okay, what's going on?" I hesitated, searching his face for any sign of guilt. "Are you involved with Julian?" Liam blinked, his expression shifting from confusion to something harder to read. For a moment, he said nothing. Then he sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I was hoping you wouldn't find out like this," he said quietly. The world seemed to tilt beneath me. "So it's true. Eve, listen." "No," I snapped, my voice rising. "You don't get to deflect this. I need you to tell me the truth, Liam. Are you and Julian together?" He exhaled deeply, his shoulders slumping. "Yes." The word hit me like a sledgehammer. I staggered back, shaking my head. How long has this been going on?" Liam looked at the floor, unable to meet my eyes. 3 years. 3 years? My voice cracked. "You've been sleeping with my husband for 3 years? It's not that simple," he said, finally looking at me. "I didn't plan for any of this to happen. Neither did Julian. But we couldn't stop. I felt like I was drowning. My chest tightened, my vision blurred, and I struggled to catch my breath. "You're my brother, Liam. My brother. How could you do this to me?" "I never wanted to hurt you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "But Julian and I, we care about each other. It's real, Eve. Real. I laughed bitterly, tears streaming down my face. You're trying to justify this? You betrayed me, Liam. Both of you did. I know, he said softly, and I hate myself for it. But I couldn't walk away from him. I sank into a chair, burying my face in my hands. My world was crumbling around me, and the two people I trusted most had been the ones to destroy it. How long has Julian felt this way? I asked after a long silence. Liam hesitated. Since before you got married. I looked up at him, my heart breaking all over again. He married me anyway. He stood there, made those vows. And all the while he was in love with you. I don't think he ever meant to hurt you, Liam said. We tried to stop Eve. We tried to end it so many times, but what? You couldn't resist? My voice was ice. He didn't answer. The silence stretched between us, heavy and suffocating. I stood, my legs trembling beneath me. I can't do this. I can't even look at you right now. Eve, please. No, I said firmly. Don't. I need to think. I turned and walked out the door, his voice calling after me, but I didn't stop. The tears didn't come until I was back in my car, gripping the steering wheel and sobbing uncontrollably. Everything I thought I knew had been a lie. I drove aimlessly, the streets of London blurring by in a haze as I tried to process the conversation I just had with Liam. My brother, the person I had trusted more than anyone else in my life, had betrayed me. And my husband, Julian, the man I had built a life with, had been in love with him all along. The weight of it crushed me from all sides, and I couldn't escape the suffocating grip of betrayal. I didn't want to go back to the apartment. I didn't want to face Julian, not yet. I couldn't even bear to think about the lies he had been feeding me for so long. How could he look me in the eye every day, kiss me, laugh with me, and then go behind my back with Liam? And how could Liam, my own flesh and blood, betray me like this? I was sick, dizzy from the overwhelming swirl of emotions, and the more I thought about it, the angrier I became. I pulled into a quiet street, parking the car at the curb, and resting my forehead against the steering wheel. The silence inside the car was deafening, and I longed for the comforting noise of my own thoughts. But all I could hear was the relentless thrum of my heart. My chest ached with the weight of the secrets I had discovered, and my mind spun in circles, replaying every moment I'd shared with both Julian and Liam. How could I have missed it? How had I been so blind to their deceit? The worst part was that I couldn't even tell anyone. Who could I trust now? My mother would never believe me. She adored Julian, always praising him for being a perfect match for me. And Liam. He was my older brother, my protector. How could I explain to her that both of them had torn my world apart? I thought about calling a friend, someone to vent to, someone who could help me make sense of everything. But I didn't have anyone. Julian and I had kept to ourselves, and my relationships outside of him had become sparse over the years. I had poured everything into our marriage, into believing that our life together was something special, and now it all felt like a lie. I stared out the window, blinking back the tears that threatened to spill. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the city, but the beauty of the moment only made me feel emptier. I thought about Liam's words. I didn't plan for any of this to happen. It didn't matter whether it had been planned or not. They had both known what they were doing. They had made the choice to keep their affair a secret, to lie to me, to hurt me. As the sky darkened, I finally started the car again and drove back to the flat. I couldn't stay away forever. I had to face Julian, had to hear his side of the story, even though I was terrified of what he might say. When I walked into the apartment, it was eerily quiet. Julian was sitting on the couch, looking tired, his jacket draped over the back. He glanced up when I entered, his face brightening for a moment before he noticed my expression. "Eve," he asked, his voice cautious. "Are you okay? You've been gone for hours." I didn't answer right away. I couldn't bring myself to speak. The lump in my throat was too large, and my hands shook uncontrollably. I stared at him, trying to make sense of everything. He looked like the man I loved, the man I had married. But how could I look at him and not see the deception that lay beneath the surface? "What happened?" Julian asked, standing up from the couch and taking a step toward me. "Eve, talk to me." I swallowed hard, taking a deep breath to steady myself. "I spoke to Liam. I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Julian froze, his expression changing in an instant. You spoke to him? His voice trembled, and I saw a flicker of fear in his eyes. He knew. He knew I was close to discovering everything. Yes, Julian. I spoke to him. I repeated, my voice stronger now. And I know everything. He took a step back, running his hand through his hair, clearly struggling to find the words. I could feel the anger bubbling up inside me, but I forced it down. I wanted the truth, not a confrontation. Eve, you've been lying to me. I interrupted, my words cutting through the silence like a knife. You've been lying to me for years, Julian. I know about you and Liam. His face paled, and he opened his mouth, but no words came out at first. The seconds stretched into minutes. And then he finally spoke, his voice shaky. I didn't want you to find out like this, he said quietly. It's not what you think, Eve. I laughed bitterly. Not what I think. You've been sleeping with my brother for years, Julian. How could I think anything else? He closed his eyes, his face crumpling in guilt. It wasn't supposed to be like this. I never meant to hurt you. Then why did you do it? The question escaped before I could stop it. My voice cracked and I couldn't keep the tears from flowing anymore. Why Julian? Why him? I don't know, he whispered. It just happened. It wasn't planned. I swear to you it wasn't planned. But after it happened, I couldn't stop it. I couldn't stop him. Stop him, echoed, my voice trembling with disbelief. You couldn't stop him? You're the one who chose to do this, Julian. You're the one who kept it going. I know, he said, his voice low and filled with regret. And I'm so sorry. I never wanted to hurt you. I never wanted you to find out this way. I took a shaky breath, trying to steady myself. How long, Julian? How long have you and Liam been together? He looked at me, his eyes filled with shame. 3 years. 3 years. The same amount of time Liam had told me. I felt sick again, the realization hitting me like a tidal wave. I don't know what to say, Eve. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't deserve your forgiveness. No, you don't, I whispered. But it doesn't matter, does it? You already did this. You've already destroyed everything. The weight of his confession crushed me, and I couldn't bear to look at him any longer. I turned away, walking toward the door. Eve, Julian called after me, his voice desperate. Please don't leave. I stopped, my hand on the doorknob, but I didn't turn around. I need to be alone, Julian. I need to think. With that, I left. The cold night air hit me like a slap in the face as I stepped into the hallway, and I couldn't stop the tears from flowing. My life had been turned upside down, and I didn't know if I could ever go back to the way things were before. I didn't know what to do next. All I knew was that I couldn't stay here. I couldn't stay in a place that was filled with lies. The sound of my footsteps echoed in the hallway, and as I walked away, I realized that nothing would ever be the same again. I didn't go home that night. I couldn't. The thought of stepping back into that apartment, back into the life I had shared with Julian, was unbearable. It was like everything about that life had become a lie, and I didn't know how to face it. I wandered the streets of London, walking aimlessly, my mind a chaotic whirl of thoughts. The city felt so empty now, despite the bustling crowd and the lights flashing in the distance. How had everything turned into this? I had built my whole life around the idea that I could trust the people closest to me. But now, the people I loved most had betrayed me in ways I couldn't even comprehend. I thought about calling a cab, going somewhere, anywhere, to escape for a while, but I didn't even know where to go. I was lost not just in the city, but in my own life. I had trusted Julian, had believed that our love was the foundation for everything we had. But it wasn't real. It couldn't have been. Not if he had been hiding this affair with Liam all along. I thought about Liam, my brother, the person I had looked up to for years, the one who had always been there for me when I needed him. How could he do this to me? It wasn't just the betrayal of my husband. It was the betrayal of family. He had known me my whole life. He knew how much I loved Julian. How could he sleep with him, knowing that it would destroy me? How could he do that and still look me in the eye? I pulled myself out of the reverie when I realized I was standing in front of a park. It was quiet here, away from the chaos of the city. I needed space to breathe, to think. I walked in, finding a bench and sitting down, staring out at the empty paths that twisted through the trees. The cold air bit at my skin, but I welcomed it. Anything to numb the ache in my chest. I didn't know how long I had been sitting there when I felt my phone buzz in my pocket. It was Julian. I stared at the screen for a moment, unsure of what to do. I knew I couldn't avoid him forever, but I wasn't ready to speak to him. Not yet. I didn't even know what I would say to him. What could I say after everything that had happened? I ignored the call, but it came through again a few minutes later. And then again. And again. Each time the phone buzzed, I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. I didn't want to talk to him. I didn't want to hear whatever excuses he had. But I knew I had to face him eventually. I stood up, walking away from the bench, my feet taking me back into the streets. My mind was still reeling from the conversation I'd had with Liam earlier. How could they have kept this hidden for so long? Did they really think I wouldn't find out? Or had they just stopped caring about what I would think? I walked for hours, not knowing where I was going. Only that I couldn't go back to that apartment just yet. The city began to quiet down, the streets becoming emptier as the night deepened. Eventually, I found myself in front of a small cafe. I wasn't hungry, but the thought of sitting down somewhere and trying to collect myself seemed like the only thing I could do. I pushed open the door, the warmth of the cafe enveloping me as I stepped inside. The barista behind the counter gave me a quick, polite smile, but I didn't return it. I just ordered a coffee, paid, and found a seat by the window. The quiet hum of the cafe was oddly soothing, and for a moment, I felt like I could breathe again. My phone buzzed once more, and this time, I looked down at it without hesitation. It was a message from Julian. "I'm sorry. I never wanted to hurt you. Please let me explain." My hands trembled as I stared at the message. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to think that maybe, just maybe, there was some part of this that wasn't as terrible as it seemed. But the truth was that I couldn't even look at him without feeling like I was drowning in his lies. How could I ever trust him again? The message came again, and I could hear the desperation in his words, even though they were just text. "Please, Eve. I love you. I don't want to lose you." But I wasn't sure I could love him again. The man who had promised to be with me forever, the man I thought I knew inside and out, had broken that promise. And my brother, my own brother, had been a part of it. I felt a deep, gnawing emptiness inside me, one that I wasn't sure how to fill. I didn't know how to respond. I stared at the screen, my fingers hovering over the keys, but nothing came out. What was I supposed to say to him after everything? "I don't know if I can forgive you," I typed, my heart aching as the words appeared on the screen. "I don't know if I can even look at you anymore." It was the truth, and somehow, it felt like the hardest thing I'd ever written. But it was also the only thing I could say. I hit send before I could change my mind. The response came almost immediately. "I understand," he wrote. "I'll give you space. I'll be here when you're ready." I didn't know what I was waiting for, or even if I would ever be ready. But for now I needed to think. I needed time to figure out who I was without him, without Liam, without the lies. The rest of the night passed in a blur. I stayed in the cafe for a while, sipping my coffee and trying to quiet my thoughts, but they wouldn't stop. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Julian's face, and then Liam's, and the images twisted together, becoming one big, horrifying mess. I left the cafe when the last of the customers had gone, walking back into the cool night air. I wasn't sure what the next step was. I wasn't sure where to go from here. But I knew that I couldn't go back to the way things had been before. I couldn't go back to Julian, not after what he had done. And I couldn't go back to Liam, not after everything he had taken from me. I just wanted to escape. But I wasn't sure where I could go to find peace. I had spent days in limbo, wandering through the motions of life, as if I was watching it all unfold from a distance. I hadn't spoken to Julian since the night I sent him that message. I hadn't spoken to Liam either. My phone had stayed silent, save for the occasional message from Julian asking for forgiveness, begging for a chance to explain himself. But I wasn't ready for any of it. I wasn't ready to listen to his words or to see him again. I spent my days in a haze, trying to sort through the mess of emotions that had consumed me. But there was no clarity, no peace, just endless questions and the deep, gnawing ache of betrayal that wouldn't let me rest. I moved out of the apartment. It felt like the only thing I could do. The only way to escape the memories that were suffocating me. It didn't feel like my home anymore. How could it? How could I live in a place where every corner, every room, felt tainted by the lies that had unfolded there? So I packed up my things, as much as I could bear to take with me, and left without a word to Julian. I didn't know where I was going, or what I was looking for, but I knew I couldn't stay there. I rented a small flat on the outskirts of the city, away from everything that had been familiar. It was quiet, secluded, and it gave me the space I needed to think. I started over, in a sense. I found new routines, new ways of living without the constant presence of Julian or Liam. I buried myself in work and spent hours with friends I hadn't seen in ages, trying to reclaim pieces of myself that I hadn't realized I'd lost. But no matter how far I ran, no matter how many distractions I tried to find, the truth was always there, just beneath the surface. It wasn't just about Julian and Liam anymore. It was about me. About who I had become in their shadow. I had let myself get lost in the lie of our perfect life. I had believed in something that wasn't real. And now I had to face the reality of it. I had to rebuild who I was, and that was harder than I had ever imagined. It wasn't easy to let go of the love I had for Julian. I had loved him deeply. And part of me, the part that still ached for him, wanted to believe that maybe we could fix it, maybe we could make it work again. But the truth was that I couldn't forget. I couldn't erase the image of him with Liam. I couldn't unsee the years of deception. And then there was Liam. The betrayal stung even more when I thought about it. He had always been my brother. The person I had trusted most in the world. How could he look me in the eye and still continue with this secret relationship with Julian? How could he betray me like this, knowing how much it would break me? The anger I felt towards him was just as intense as the pain. And yet, even though I was furious, I missed him too. It was confusing, this mixture of emotions. It felt like a battle between love and hatred, and I wasn't sure who was going to win. Time passed, and I began to find some semblance of peace. The anger started to fade, replaced by a quiet sadness that felt more manageable. I realized I couldn't spend my life hating Julian or Liam. That wouldn't help me heal. But I also knew that I couldn't continue to hold on to the relationship I once had with either of them. It was gone. Broken. Irreparable. I started therapy. It wasn't easy. Talking about everything, reliving the pain, was excruciating. But slowly, I began to understand why I had let myself be so blind. Why I had ignored the small signs that something was wrong. I had wanted to believe so badly in the love I thought we shared. I had convinced myself that it was real, that it could survive anything. But now I understood that sometimes love isn't enough. Trust was the foundation of everything, and that had been shattered beyond repair. After a few months, I received a message from Liam. It was brief, apologetic, and filled with regret. He asked if I could meet him just once to talk. I debated whether or not to respond. Part of me wanted to scream at him, to demand answers, to make him understand the depth of the pain he had caused. But another part of me knew that I needed to face this, that I needed to confront the past in order to move forward. I agreed to meet him, but I wasn't sure what would come of it. When I saw him in the cafe that afternoon, I was struck by how much he had changed. The confident, protective older brother I had once known was gone. In his place was a man who looked just as broken as I felt. We sat across from each other in silence for a moment before he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry, Eve. I know I can't undo what I did, but I need you to know that I never wanted to hurt you. I never meant for any of this to happen. I thought I was doing what was best for everyone, but I was wrong. I was selfish." I didn't respond right away. I was still processing his words, still figuring out how to feel. Part of me wanted to hate him, to tell him everything I had been feeling for months. But another part of me couldn't help but feel the old familiarity. He was my brother. "I don't know if I can forgive you," I said finally, my voice steady but filled with sorrow. "What you did broke me. I don't know if I'll ever get past it. But I need to find my own way forward. Without you, without Julian." Liam nodded, his eyes filled with tears. "I understand. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry." We sat there for a while longer, neither of us saying much, But in that silence, I began to feel something shift. The anger and hurt were still there, but they weren't as sharp anymore. I wasn't sure if I would ever truly heal, but I knew that I was beginning to find my own path. When I left the cafe, I didn't feel any sense of closure, but I did feel lighter. It wasn't the end of my journey, but it was a step toward it. I had learned that healing wasn't linear. It didn't happen all at once. And it didn't require forgiveness from the people who had wronged me. It was about finding peace within myself, about reclaiming my own life and moving on, regardless of what had happened before. As I walked away from that meeting, I realized that the hardest part wasn't confronting the people who had betrayed me. The hardest part was learning to forgive myself for not seeing the truth sooner, for allowing myself to be deceived, and for staying in a place of hurt for so long. But I was done with that. I was ready to move on. It was time to rebuild piece by piece and find a future that belonged to me, not to the lies that had once held me captive. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe again,